welcome home. We are so honored to gather with you today, whether this is your first time or the first time in a long time, or whether you are exploring matters of faith, struggling to trust God, or passionately following Jesus. I've been praying for you, been preparing for you, and really do hope that you feel right at home today. If you have a Bible with you, I want to invite you to make your way over to 1 Samuel chapter 18 as we continue our series in the life of David. That's 1 Samuel 18. But as you're making your way over there, I want to take just a few moments and share with you a little bit about what's been going on in my life and where I've been over the last 10 days. And if you're looking at me and you're going, man, he looks tired, it's because I am. I spent the last 10 days in Porto, Portugal with Luke and Shayna Camera and their wonderful team. Really exploring, because we are partnering with them to plant a life-giving church in Porto, Portugal. And my wife and I traveled through a few time zones and a few countries and a few states, and ultimately recently got in after traveling 20 hours straight. And so again, if I look tired, it's because I am tired. But I have to tell you, I'm also deeply, deeply excited and encouraged. Now, Luke and Shayna Camera joined our church family about 2 years ago, longtime friends, and they served with us for about 8 months. I really do believe that the strength of a church is not found in its gathering capacity, but rather its sending potential. A life-giving church is a sending church, and we had the privilege and honor of sending out Luke and Shayna Camera over a year ago and their family to Porto Portugal, and we spent the last 10 days with them. A city that is incredibly unreached, a country that is incredibly unreached, a country of 12 million people where 9.5 million people wake up in the morning, go to bed at night without a relationship with God, and they are there to plant a church with a team. It was wonderful to be in their city and to eavesdrop and hear not only the opportunities but the challenges. And I just want to say, you may never go to Portugal or to Porto, Portugal, but because you faithfully give here, a portion of those resources make it possible for a church, a life-giving church, to be planted in Portugal. So thank you. Thank you for your generosity, and thank you for being a church that's serious about taking all of Jesus to all of the world. I love being a part of a church that takes seeing all of Jesus go to all of the world seriously. And it was an absolute privilege to be in Portugal and meet some people who are now joining Luke and Shayna's team. They spent the last year learning more the language of Portuguese and will a lot this next year. But they introduced us to their friends who have joined the team. And this is Silvio and Simona and their 2 daughters. Their story was incredible to me. She led a firm, a dental practice in São Paulo, Brazil, one of the largest cities in the world. She was incredibly successful. Silvio, her husband, is a systems engineer. They had the cars, they had the house, they had the vacations, they had everything that you can imagine or want, great comfort and affluency in Brazil. And one day in a gathering just like this, God really spoke to them in a powerful way. They encountered the grace of God, the ministry of the Holy Spirit, and started to ask the question of how do we handle and how do we view the very success that we have been given. They learned more about the heart of God for the nations, and they made a decision as a family to fully surrender their life, to take all of Jesus to all of the world, to position their life to reach the unreached. And so they shared with me that they left there in the U.S. their 6-figure jobs. They left their home, their cars, and their family. They left all they knew to go to where they didn't know anyone. And not only did they leave a city, but they went to one of the most remote places of the world, the Amazon, where roughly 30 million people are scattered throughout this mass amount of area. They lived 10 years here. No stores, no Starbucks, no restaurants. They would get their food occasionally by a plane, sometimes just dropping in. And they spent 10 years of their life working with the Amazonians, a group of Indians there. 10 years of their life faithfully serving them and doing the best they could to share the love and message of Jesus. And they shared with me a little bit of their story, some of their incredible hardships, and also the doors that God opened up along the way. After they're sharing with me their story and leaving the comfort of Sao Paulo, Brazil, to go to the remote villages of the Amazon, I'm just hoping they don't ask me, so tell me your story, by the way. They sacrificed tremendously, and after 10 years, their assignment had come to an end. And they sensed God was opening a door for them to join Luke and Shana to the crowded streets of the urban metroplex known as Porto Portugal. 1.3 million people who live in the metro area, a place that's highly unreached, where people identify, if you will, as Catholics because of a dictatorship that lasted up until the 70s. They have a lot of religious relics, but do not have a relationship with God. In fact, when I was there, I got to meet Matilda. Matilda, who was in her early 20s, had recently come to know Christ, and she shared with me that throughout her entire life, she actually led different events for the Catholic Church. She had never read her Bible. She didn't know about the message of Jesus. And she was sharing with me her story. And I said, so tell me what you think about the U.S. And she lit up. She said, well, that's where God is obviously at work. I mean, you have these videos of worship and you have these things called Christian bookstores. And I even see people who have shirts. They're Christian shirts. She goes, we don't have any bookstores or shirts, and there's no Christian schools in the country of Portugal. And she was just sharing with me. And I got to meet several people, and one of them said, when we think of the U.S., we think of a fertile ground. It's like you live in a garden, but we live in a rock slab. It is a hard-reached place. And I reminded them that Jesus said, upon this rock, I will build my church. Silvio and Simona shared with me the story. They've been living there about a year, of getting to meet some people who lived in their own apartment complex who kept asking the question, why are you here? You're so successful with a dentist practice, and you have a systems engineer, and why would you leave that to be here in Porto? And they shared with them how God had redefined their view of success. And ultimately, they shared with them the message and hope of Jesus. And that family came to know Christ, which may not seem like that significant to us, but after learning, I mean, a church is fortunate if once a year they're able to introduce one person to Jesus. This entire family gave their life to Jesus. So once again, I just want to say to you, thank you for being serious about taking all of Jesus to all of the world. It really is encouraging to hear what God is doing. And it's also fascinating to me as we turn our attention to the life of David, because Silvio and Simona ultimately found themselves in a place where they were confronted with a test. And David was confronted with tests along the way as well. It's a test that you'll be confronted with, and we're going to see this in 1 Samuel chapter 18. It's a test of success. In fact, I've titled this message, Passing the Test of Success. When you think about it, life is full of tests. And there are so many tests that come our way. In fact, some of us, whenever we hear the word test, we just get anxiety because we don't like the thought of having to take a test. And sometimes you have been in a place where someone gave you a test that you didn't expect, and it completely sent you into a world full of stress. I was thinking back to a particular moment where a college student was in a class on ornithology, the study of birds. It was full of people in the class, and he was really looking forward to it, but the professor had a reputation for being cruel and surprising the students. It came down to the final exam, which was 50% of the grade for the entire class. He studied so hard and he worked so hard. And when they got to the exam, the final exam, the professor had 5 cages of birds, and he lifted up the cages. They had cloth over top of them, enough to where you could see the legs of the birds. And he said, I'm giving you 20 minutes, and you have to write down and identify these birds based on nothing but their legs. They had never talked about this before. They didn't know anything about this. And This sent this particular student into an absolute uproar. He came and he said to the professor, "How can you expect us to do this? You've never even told us about this." And the professor said, "Oh, well, this is life." And said, "If you don't do it, you will fail, and I don't mind failing you at all." And the professor had a smirk on his face. Well, the student was absolutely discouraged and said, "Okay, well then you will fail me." And he went to walk out of the class. Again, a class full of a few hundred people. The professor said, "That's it, then I will fail you. You tell me, what is your name? Tell me your name right now." And it dawned on the student, who was wearing windbreakers, that this professor did not know his name. And so he looked at the professor with a little smirk on his face, lifted up his windbreaker so all you could see is his legs, and he said, "I don't know. You tell me." We always get stressed out whenever there are tests that we take. And life is full of tests. And if you walk with God for any length of time in a broken world, you will find tests that come your way. I wrote down just a few tests that I think we face in our faith walking journey. When your world is shaken up, and some of you know firsthand what it means to have your world turned upside down, we face the test of discouragement. Whenever you're pressured to conform, maybe it's in your workplace and people are asking you to do something that you know is not in alignment with God's way and God's will, and you face the test of integrity. When your beliefs are belittled, when people mock you for your faith in Jesus, you face the test of trust. When you're asked to do the impossible, Luke and Shane are in an impossible, hard situation, and right now they're facing the test of faith. When you need to have a difficult conversation with someone, some of you, that's exactly what you know you need to do. And it's not easy, it's difficult, it's challenging, it's hard, and you're facing the test of love. When you're in a situation that looks utterly hopeless and you have no idea how in the world you'll get through this, you face the test of endurance. And when the answer of your prayer is delayed, and many of us are right there right now, you face the test of waiting. Life is full of tests. And when we find David in 1 Samuel chapter 18, he's presented with a test that he's going to face over and over in his life, and sometimes he passes it, and sometimes he fails it. But it's the test of success. In chapter 16, we're introduced to David, who is out in the field serving his family, and he moves from this field ultimately into a place of being anointed to be the next king of Israel. He's anointed at the age of 16, but he's not in that position of being king until the age of 30. In chapter 17, it's David who moves from a field to the valley, and it's in the valley of Elah that he fights against Goliath, and with 5 smooth stones and 1 big faith, he defeats Goliath. And ultimately, he moves from anonymity to everyone knowing his name. And now in chapter 18, he's moved from a field to a valley, and he is in the house of Saul. Saul is the current king of Israel. And we learn that David ultimately experiences and is given success. I want to show you 3 places that it's clear that David was given success. In 1 Samuel chapter 18, verse 5, it says, whatever mission Saul sent him on, David was so successful that Saul gave him a high rank in the army, and this pleased all the troops and Saul's officers as well. David was given success in the very missions that Saul sent him on. Now, David was a person who was under authority before he ever was in authority. And when it comes to godly leadership, we have to learn to be under authority before we're ever given authority. Now, when it comes to his success, I think it's easy whenever we face success to somehow or another think that our success is all our ongoing achievements and our abilities. But the truth and reality is that all success we have is connected to the common grace of God. That if you are successful, it is because of God's common grace and His goodness in your life. I love just reflecting back on what's said in the Old Testament, Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 17 and 18 in the Message. Moses says, if you start thinking to yourselves, I did all this by myself, I'm rich, it's all mine, well, think again. Remember that God, your God, gave you the strength to produce all this wealth, and so as to confirm the covenant that He promised to your ancestors as it is today. That the reality is that we're breathing God's air, that we are using the mind God gave to us. We're looking through the eyes that God gave to us. That God is the one who's given us all that we have, and everything that we have at the end of the day belongs to Him, including our success. David was successful over and over. The second time we see this in verse 12 of chapter 18. Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with David, but he had departed from Saul. So he sent David away from him and gave him command over 1,000 men. And David led the troops in their campaigns. Notice this, in everything he did, he had great success because the Lord was with him. When Saul saw how successful he was, it says that he was afraid of him. I don't want to miss this for a moment because Saul had every reason to slow down and to celebrate with David all the success that David was having. You want to surround yourself with people who are able to celebrate with you. But in this moment, Saul is not celebrating with David. And I think this points to something much deeper. If you can't celebrate with others on the outside, it's often a sign of an unhealthy soul on the inside. The very fact that you can celebrate with others is a sign of a healthy interior your life. And so the chapter closes with another particular moment that simply points to the success of David in 1 Samuel 18. It's in verse 30. The Philistine commanders continued to go out to battle, and as often as they did, David met them with more success than the rest of Saul's officers, and his name became well known. David experienced success, and he ultimately passed the test of success. He doesn't let success distract him from his family. He doesn't let success derail him from his purpose. He doesn't let success ultimately deconstruct his faith. And what I've seen over and over again is that when we experience success, oftentimes success can distract us from our family, derail us from our purpose, and ultimately deconstruct our faith. Success can be a really great threat into our life. And we don't often think of it this way, but I want you to consider this with me, that success is as much of a test as suffering or failure ever will be. And now hold on just a moment and try to track with me. Oftentimes when people experience success, they get distracted. But when people experience suffering, they ultimately try to lean into God more. In fact, whenever they experience suffering, one of the questions that's often asked is, where is God working? How is God working? And why won't God do this in my life? There's a pursuit, if you will, of God. In failure, there becomes this humility of wanting to learn and experience life differently. But success is altogether different. And there's this difference between success and suffering, and success can be even harder because in suffering, we tend to focus on God, but in success, we tend to forget God. When a person of faith experiences success, if we're not careful, we can ultimately move toward independency and forget God altogether rather than a sense of humble surrender and dependence on God. What I'm trying to say is success can ruin your life. And all of us know of someone who experienced success and they didn't handle it well and it ruined their life. They are so consumed at work that they forget their family, and all of a sudden they are divorced and they don't have a relationship with their kids. They are so successful that now they've got an opinion about everything. They are not flexible anymore. They're no longer a learner. They're no longer a servant, and they find themselves lonely without any good friends. If we're not careful, if we don't handle it well, success can ruin our life. And failure oftentimes is much easier to deal with than success. Here's what Abraham Lincoln says. He says, nearly all men can stand adversity, but if you want to test a man's character, give him power. Just give him some power and watch what that does. The wisest man who ever lived, Solomon, who happens to be David's son, says it this way. 2 things I ask of you, Lord. Do not refuse me before I die. Keep falsehood and lies far from me. Give me neither poverty nor riches, but give me only my daily bread. Otherwise, I may have too much and disown you. And say, who is the Lord? Or I may become poor and steal and so dishonor the name of my God. And Solomon knew all what it was like to have the trappings of success and wealth. And he's just simply saying, Lord, help me to have a life that is cultivated with contentment, deep contentment, that I don't disown you or dishonor you. Success can impact and change our life in many ways. And here's what I want you to see. Success radically changed David's life. And sometimes success can change your life in some really good and healthy and amazing ways. And if you're not careful, again, it can ruin your life and distract you and derail you. I want to point to a few ways that success ultimately changed David's life. First is, it changed his family. In chapter 16 and chapter 17, David was ultimately with his father's family. He was living in that house, but after he defeated Goliath, after he had success, Saul becomes insecure and he moves him into his house so he can keep more of an eye on him. 1 Samuel chapter 18, the first 2 verses, it says, after David had finished talking with Saul, Jonathan became one in spirit with David. This is after Goliath has been defeated. He loved him as himself, and from that day forward, Saul kept David with him and did not let him return to his family. David's success changed his family. He wasn't eating with his family at night anymore. He didn't finish a hard day's worth of work and go to his family's household. Success can ultimately change the way that you do family life. And it certainly did for David. Success can, by the way, change your family in the best possible ways. You can have education and experiences and opportunities. It can be positive, but it also can be destructive. And for David, success changed the way that he oriented to his family. Success also brought fame into David's life. In 1 Samuel chapter 18, verse 6 and 7, it says, when the men were returning home after David had killed Goliath, the women came out from all the towns of Israel to meet King Saul. They were singing and dancing. I want you to hear the song that they are singing. As they danced, they sang, Saul has slain his thousands and David his 10,000s. Overnight, David went from the anonymity of a field to the spotlight in Israel. Everyone knew his name. Up until this point in time, we have no record inside or outside of the Bible of someone named David. And yet we know now David is a household name. And it became a household name in Israel. David had fame or influence, and his influence spread. He was popular. He had a reputation. And again, this is a wonderful gift if it's stewarded well with humility and intentionality. But when we have greater popularity and greater influence and greater platforms, we have to be careful of what that does to the interior of our life. Do you remember how the enemy ultimately attacked Jesus in those 3 temptations found in the gospel according to Matthew? In Matthew chapter 4, they're in the wilderness, and here's what happens. Again, the devil took him, meaning Jesus, to a very high mountain, showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory, and he said to him, all these things I'll give you if you'll fall down and worship me. All you need to do is no longer worship your Father and worship me. Then Jesus said to him, begone, Satan, for it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God, and him only shall you serve. The temptation was a temptation of relevancy, of influence, and of fame. And wherever you have success, this is going to be one of the tests of success. How do you handle the influence and fame that you have been given? And so ultimately, David was impacted through success in the life of his family and his fame. But also David had some new foes or some new enemies. David's out in the field and it doesn't seem like he has any enemies in chapter 16. But when we get to chapter 18, some of the people that you would think were for him ultimately turn against him. David wins against Goliath in chapter 17. He's given a new enemy in chapter 18, and that enemy is Saul. 1 Samuel chapter 18, from verse 2, from that day forward, Saul kept David with him and did not let him return to his family. He's doing that out of insecurity. In verse 8 and 9, it says Saul was very angry and he was displeased with David greatly. In verse 15, it says, when Saul saw how successful David was, he became afraid of him. And again, we imagine that Saul would be for David, but because of David's success, he gets new enemies. And whenever you experience success, you will have new foes. But you not only get fame and family and foes, but also David experienced new friends, heaven's friends. We looked at this 2 weeks ago. We looked at David being introduced to Jonathan in chapter 18. And David has a clear heaven's assignment on his life, and he will get heaven's friends to help him complete heaven's assignment in Jonathan. Please hear me that when you experience success, you will have a new set of friends. And sometimes we resist those friends. So can I say over you, receive the friends God wants to bring into your life for new seasons of your life and new seasons of success. And that is certainly the story of David. Success is a gift, but it also is its test. And ultimately, a success is a bigger test than suffering or failure. And we have to handle it in the right way. A way that we don't get distracted, we don't become disillusioned or discouraged or deconstruct our faith. And there are many things when it comes to the importance of passing the test of success. But I want to share with you just a few things that I really believe that God wants to encourage you with today, that I think we can put in practice in our everyday life that can help us follow Jesus and handle and view success well. And the first is the most important, and that is this: make success a who, not a what. Ultimately, we are trained to think of success as a what or a where, that success is about an accomplishment that I have, that finally, whenever I get the right job, promoted in the right circles, achieve the right platform, get enough money in my bank account, or success is a where when I become in that position or move into that neighborhood. And we think of success in terms of what and where. But if you want a healthy soul, if you want to make it to the end loving Jesus, success is not about a what or a where. Success is about a who. Make success about a who. It's exactly what David does. We read his epitaph in Acts chapter 13, verse 36. Now when David had served God's purpose in his own generation, he fell asleep, he was buried with his ancestors, and his body decayed. David made success a who, and that who was God, and he was determined to serve God in his generation. I'm telling you, when it comes to serving God, if we make success about a who, ultimately we will not find ourselves in these other places that can be harmful to the interior of our life. In fact, that's the contrast, isn't it, between Saul and David? In 1 Samuel chapter 13, it says, "But now your kingdom," speaking about Saul's kingdom, "will not endure. The Lord has sought out a man after his own heart and appointed him ruler of his people, because you have not kept the Lord's commandment." Saul made a success about a what, which was the kingdom, and about being king of Israel. But David made success about a who. He wanted to faithfully, humbly, intentionally, and boldly serve God. That our first circle of the who is always God, and the next circle is our family. Please hear me today. You will have success in parenting if you make it about a who, not a what. You'll have success in your marriage if you make it about a who and not a what. You can win at work and lose at home, and you will lose. So the first thing I would say to us is to pass the test of success, we need to make success about a who, not a what. And we need to turn success into a journey, not a destination. Too often we think, well, just when I get there, then I will have arrived. And I would just confess to you, early on, serving as a pastor, that was one of the great temptations that I dealt with. I thought, when we finally get here, when we finally do this, when we finally accomplish this. But the truth was, every time we did something, I realized there was just another challenge across the way. There was another opportunity, another leg in the journey. And life is a journey. And when we turn success into a journey rather than a destination, I think we pass the test of success. And by the way, that's what successful people do. Successful parents do this. Successful people in their workplace do this. They turn it into a journey, not simply a destination. I'm reading a book by Craig Groeschel, who ultimately is a partner in creating the YouVersion Bible app that so many of us love and enjoy. He planted a church called Life Church that has campuses all over the place. This is what he said. I've been thinking about this a lot. He said, successful people do consistently what normal people do occasionally. Let me just say that again. Successful people do consistently what normal people do occasionally. That success ultimately becomes about consistency. Every single day. Isn't that right? Successful parents, it's about consistency. Successful in your work, successful in your health, successful in your finances, it's the challenge of consistency. And I think we pass the test of success when we turn success into a journey rather to a destination. And last is, we handle success with gratitude, not with greed. That pride does not grow easily in the soil of gratitude. That everything we have been given is a gift from God, and we steward it ultimately for His glory, for our joy, and for others' good. That's what happens, that our life is changed, and it starts to change the way even we think about success. We think about how grateful we are for God's common grace in our life, His intentional goodness in our life. We don't become greedy. We unleash generosity with gratitude. And I pray over your life often. I pray that God gives you success. I pray He gives you favor with your finances and your family and your future. And that you do not become someone who has the mindset of an owner, but rather a steward, to unleash everything that God has put in your hands for His glory. Because if God brings something to you, then He wants to bring something through you. David was undeniably successful, and he had his share of failures, as we will see, and his share of suffering. But he passed the test of success. He made success about a who, not a what or a where. He turned success into a journey and not a destination. And he handled success with gratitude, not with greed. And I think if we do the same, we will ultimately pass the test of success. Will you pray with me? God, I'm so grateful for everything that You've given to us. And I thank You with all the blessings in our life. It really does seem like every season of blessing has some season of testing. And so will You find us empowered by Your Spirit, saturated in Your grace, with a heart of humility and surrender, passing the test of success. I pray for all of us that we will make success a who, and that who is You. That our life would be lived in devotion and joy for You and with You. That the people who know us the best will respect us the most. And that we will see success as a journey and not a destination. And we ultimately will have a life that handles success with gratitude and unleashes generosity. So we thank You for the life of David. We thank You for the time in Your word. It's in Your name that we pray these things. Amen.